Hello.
Good day, Dr. McIntyre.
I forgot to send you a bio. Do you
It's
still
okay.
have the old one?
Yeah, I do.
It was fine.
Cool.
I I think I lost some of my slides, but it'll be all right. It'll be all right. There was too many of them anyway. Oh shit. Oh.
All right, welcome everyone for another edition of Podchaser Pro's webinar series. Very much looking forward to today's presentation. We have a guest with us, and this is Dr. Adrian McIntyre. Today we're going to be talking about reframing and redefining the role of reach when it comes to podcasting, specifically through the lens of earned media, and in some cases paid media. If you've attended one of our webinars before, you've probably seen Dr. Adrian's comments that have always added value to the conversations and decks that I've presented. And we're especially grateful that Dr. McIntyre is joining us today because if you can't tell, I've lost my voice. So instead of me joining on, you're going to get somebody who has been behind the mic for many, many years. And speaking of being behind the mic, a little bit about Dr. Adrian. Um, Dr. McIntyre is a cultural anthropologist, linguist, and internationally recognized authority on verbal communication. He's the founder of Speed of Story, a strategic communications consultancy for PR agencies and marketing firms. Adrian's worked at the intersection of sound and story since he was a kid. His broadcasting career began in 1978 at the age of 5, and he earned a master's degree and PhD in anthropology from University of Cal Berkeley. He's lived in over 30 countries and spent more than a decade in the Middle East and Africa as a researcher, journalist, communications advisor, and media spokesperson. He reported for Newsweek, running up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and then subsequently went on to work for Mercy Corps and Oxfam. So, Dr. Adrian's uniquely positioned to be able to talk to us about how media has changed and why it's so important for us to redefine what reach means in our current context. And without further ado, I will kick it over to him so you don't have to hear my gravelly voice any further. Adrian, thanks again for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be here. Is my volume okay? Sometimes when I jump between apps, it goes too quiet.
You're good.
Um, Everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm going to share my screen, and this is where Trent has to authorize me to do so. All right, now, uh, perfect. Okay. So, the premise of this session is something that has really, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've been grappling with this for a long time. I work with a lot of PR firms, and I know they're grappling with this. And I've heard this come up over and over again in previous webinars that Trent has led. And I thought, you know what, we just need to tackle this head on. Can we please just have a conversation about audience size and whether or not that should matter anymore? And this could potentially ruffle some feathers. I'm not claiming that I have the only answer, but I have a way to think about it that might help you. So let me just jump into this. The idea is that you can get big results from a small audience, but only if you think differently about reach and about media and about your role either as a maker of media or arranger of media. If you have clients that you book on podcasts, or if you yourself uh, are a featured guest on podcasts, this is a critically important conversation for us to have. So that's what we're going to do. My core premise here is that even though if you look at the statistics, podcasting continues to grow year over year in every market around the world, I hear so many folks struggling to harness the power of it. There's a lot of frustration around it. It seems like the market is dominated by a few big players, and that leaves everybody else out. You go into Podchaser Pro to try to book a client or yourself onto a podcast, and you set your filter to everything over 1,000 followers, and all of a sudden there's just not much in that particular niche for you to work with. So, what are we going to do about this? Well, the first thing is, and I'll draw a little bit on my anthropologist and linguist background here, but we have to understand the power of context. And I promise this will make sense, but I want to do a little bit of a strange thing here. I want to talk about the context of what I'm doing right now. I'm holding up my hand with two fingers up in the air, right? So what does this mean? Well, it depends. In the context of number, this means two. In the context of anatomy and physiology, these are, I forget, is it metatarsals and or metacarpals? Anyway, finger bones. Right? In the context of war, this meant victory. In the context of the anti-war movement, this meant peace. In the context of a family photo, it's bunny ears. So you see what I mean? Like the same thing can be very different, have very different meanings and different implications depending on the context. We have been holding podcasts in the context of media, right? Now that seems so self-evident that you might be like, why am I even going to listen to this guy? Because obviously that's true. Well, I don't know if that's true. Let's at least have a conversation about it. So, to get us up to the present day, I just want to run through a very potted history of mass media. What does this all mean? Where did this all come from? This year, it's been 984 years since movable type was invented in China and then refined in Korea. 570 years since a European gets credit for doing the thing that the Chinese and the Koreans actually did much earlier. Johannes Gutenberg commercialized the printing press. Good for him. 334 years since the first American newspaper was published. 132 years since the first film studios were built. Did you know film came before radio? 104 years since music and talk were broadcast over the radio. 35 years since Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web, as those of us over the age of 50 used to call it. 21 years since Mark Zuckerberg launched thefacebook.com. At Harvard, Facebook, of course, still has, even now in 2025, over 3 billion monthly active users. And of course, TikTok is right in there with over 1.5 billion users as well. So that's mass media, right? Well, what we consume has so profoundly changed that I think it's worth dwelling a little bit on whether we're even talking about the same thing anymore. See, I think the context that most of us have for the work we do is an outdated context tied to legacy media, linear broadcasting, that for the most part does not exist anymore. Even when it does, most people are not watching TV on their TV. They are watching short clips from those programs on all the apps that we have on our phone. And oh, yes, because I'm old, I left the old Twitter bird up there for a minute. So these are the channels through which we consume almost everything, right? And this has profoundly changed the nature of that consumption. And we should talk about that. Now, my personal story is connected to this in some interesting ways. And by the way, the point of this is not that I'm so smart, it's that I should have figured this out a long time ago, and I didn't. But anyway, this is not me, this is my dad. In 1949, he, as a little kid, loved the radio, and he had a little record player, and he used to narrate the in between the songs. He used to pretend to be a radio DJ. He went on and actually got into radio professionally, and before I was born had taken over a small one-room radio station in Southern California that had an annual budget of $3,500 to run the whole thing. His salary was paid by the communications department at the college, but everything else had to come out of that small budget. In fact, they didn't have enough money. They could only stay on the air from 3 p.m. till 10 p.m. 5 days a week. So it was very small, but it was the heyday of radio. He studied radio at LA City College with a lot of the greats. And this is the environment I grew up in. Like literally, I grew up in. The arrows pointing to the little space behind the turntables in Studio A, where I used to have a little bed. If I was sick and stayed home from school, I was in the studio as my dad was on the air. And this was just the way it was for our family. In fact, in 1978, we started recording a children's radio show, Trent mentioned at the beginning, the Happy to Express, featuring our family as the voice talent. We recorded it in our home studio. This is not us recording the show. This is something else, but it's the only picture I have from that time. And that show, we recorded weekly episodes for 3 years, and then it stayed on in reruns for another like 25 years. It actually got very embarrassing. By the time I was older, I was still, well, I was actually kind of lost in the drift. That's a whole other story. But I was working in communication in a variety of different ways, both as a student and then as a practitioner of sorts. I spent most of my 20s and 30s kicking around the Middle East and Africa in a variety of different roles. And in 2004, so just 20 years ago, um, last year and this year, I was in the midst of what at that time was the biggest news story of the year. Now, it didn't start out that way. If you remember, at the beginning of 2004, the only thing on TV was Fallujah. Um, we started to get reports. I was working for a humanitarian relief organization, Oxfam, of a villages being burned, of people fleeing their homes in a part of Western Sudan that very few people had heard of at that point, called Darfur. And over the next 15 months after going there in 2004, I and others, not just me alone, helped make the conflict in Darfur the biggest news story of that year. And my job was communications officer and media spokesperson. This is going to become very relevant towards the end of this. But I was the one who was on the radio, on TV, live from the field, reporting to over 1 million live viewers on BBC World, on every radio station in North America and Europe, in every newspaper, getting the word out about this crisis. And ironically, given the rallying cry of the time, we did not save Darfur. We had the biggest audiences you could imagine. It was the only story of international news for most of that year until there was the tsunami in the Indian Ocean at the end of that end of 2005. Biggest news story of all, and it didn't work. We had the reach, but we didn't have the results. I can say that now as kind of a glib, um, sort of throwaway like tagline, but I need to share something that maybe some of you, given your professional inclination, could understand. This was perhaps some of the most um, disheartening years of my life. We were working really hard in really dangerous conditions. I had friends who were killed in some of these war zones. I myself narrowly avoided, like when we were in Iraq, I left the Canal Hotel, the UN headquarters, a couple hours before a bomb went off and killed 22 people. It was dangerous work. It was important work. We were trying to save the lives of millions of people living in desperate circumstances. I just blew through some of those photos, and it didn't work. We had the attention of the world and we had no results. We didn't save Darfur. The same year that I went to Darfur, this guy coined the term podcast, writing a piece in The Guardian. You probably are familiar with the story. He needed to add an extra line to make his, column inches or whatever it was. Maybe it was digital by that point. And so he kind of, as a throwaway, said, well, what if we call these things podcasts? Podcasting really came into its own in 2014, however. So it was sort of nerdy and very niche for those first 10 or so years. This is a very potted history. If folks were directly involved, they'll be really annoyed that I'm skipping over important things here. But Serial comes out in 2014 and blows people out of the water with its compelling storytelling, its narrative journalism, taking the sort of format that Ira Glass had invented with This American Life and turning it into a serial. And this show got over 300 million downloads. And people were like, whoa, podcasts are media. This is big time. And I think, in a way, as I look back at this, that first, when podcasting first broke into the general awareness beyond the nerds and the rest of us, it had the connotation of something big because Serial made it look like it could be something big. And look, to this day, there are still a few shows that really have a huge audience. So we're not going to diminish that. But you couldn't use, as a PR professional or as somebody with a message you wanted to get out, short of running ads, and that's a separate conversation, you couldn't use the success of Serial in any way to benefit your message, just like you can't use the success of the Joe Rogan experience for the most part to benefit your message. Um, so there's something that needs to get thought through here. And it starts with the realization, and many of you know this, all right? So I'm just laying down some groundwork here. But podcasting, unlike the legacy media that we're so familiar with, is a dispersed ecosystem. It doesn't even work the same way. Like nothing about it is the same. Anybody with a microphone can record some audio, can edit it on their their own laptop, put the whole show together. This is some of the things I have done in the past. Put it together. After recording, editing a show, they'll make some transcripts, some episode notes, and then put it onto a hosting service. It goes out on an RSS feed that gets distributed to a multiplicity of apps on your phone, but also gets put onto websites. And there's a page for the episode, and maybe there's a link that points back to some of those apps. Wherever you get your podcasts, right? It's not one channel by a long shot. Maybe it goes on the company's website if they're savvy and they write a blog post to go with the guest appearance. And then maybe those things get linked together. There's an embedded player, and maybe that points back to some of the distribution channels and so on. But the whole thing works so completely differently. It is not a consolidated single channel, and it is not a consolidated single audience. So I'm going to come back to that. This fundamentally is the podcast paradox. And if you have been struggling to figure out how to make this work for your agency or for yourself, for your business, this is something you have to grapple with. There was a time when your job was done the moment you walked out of an interview, right? You had gotten yourself, first of all, you'd gotten yourself booked, you'd gotten yourself to the studio, to the station, whether it was radio or TV, or you'd gotten the interview with the journalist, or you'd given a press conference and answered the questions. And when you stepped off the stage, when you walked away from the microphone, when you wiped the makeup off and got back in your car to go back to work, your job was done. The important thing had happened while you were talking. And hopefully there was an audience out there listening to you. Like that was the basic taken for granted assumption of broadcast media, right? If you got booked in the right place, you could reach a lot of people all at once. And when you left the studio, your job was done. And media training for that era meant practicing not to screw things up, right? Like when I was a spokesperson in Darfur, I would go, I was working for a humanitarian organization, so there was a lot of things we couldn't say because they were very sensitive and very political, not unlike some of the conflicts happening in the world right now. I would go live, BBC World, BBC Radio 4, NPR, and the first question would be, Adrian McIntyre joining us from Oxfam, tell us, is this a genocide? Oxfam, as an impartial and independent aid organization, has opinions about that, but we can't say them in public because the government of Sudan is letting us be there to help, for our agency, nearly 1 million people in, I don't remember now, 60 different locations throughout a huge country. We did, in fact, get kicked out of the country based on some things that, after I left, some things that, well, honestly, it probably had to do with stuff I said when I was there, but I wasn't the one who had the job when Oxfam got kicked out of the country. So we couldn't answer that question. We had to do the dance that you may be familiar with if you were trained in that model. Well, that's a very important question. It's on a lot of people's minds. It's not really our area of expertise. We're going to leave that to the legal scholars. What I can tell you is, right, and bridge back to your thing. Okay, what do you do, though, when the event is not an event? It is this dispersed consumption. It's fragmented. The audiences are multiple. By the way, Trent, I just wanted to add, I can't, the way I have my screen set up, I can't see the chat. So if there's anything important, interrupt. The podcast paradox is twofold. First of all, there's no one audience listening live to the thing. We all know that. But the second is people don't even find the thing the way we used to find media. 89% of podcast listeners consume them outside of the website where the podcast would be published, like its main distribution, listening primarily on smartphones. However, they discover podcasts through search and social. So this content has to live in all these different places that I kind of walked through, and it has to be optimized for all these things. And I haven't even gotten to talk about AI yet. That adds a whole other layer to discovery here. All right. So we have this problem. Consumption is happening in this very unruly, personalized, on demand um, manner, right? With micro audiences being the norm. Discovery is happening on the big bad old internet where people search for all kinds of things. That's where AI is going to play an important role, or AI assisted search is going to play an important role. And as I said at the very beginning, we are no longer watching Channel 3. We are looking at whatever our app of choice is. We are scrolling TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or X or what have you, right? So there's good news here. Podcast listening is on demand. The bad news is we have to generate that demand. The audience is not out there just waiting for us. We're not Joe Rogan. The best news, however, is that by taking charge of distribution, we can get podcast content in front of highly targeted audiences and long tail listeners. And I want to just dwell on this concept for a minute. Just as in search, 15 years ago, SEO experts were starting to cotton to the fact that it's not just the primary keyword that is important. There is a long tail, meaning the more specific, the more narrow search terms converted at a much higher rate than the more general search terms, right? If you think of searching for shoes as opposed to searching for 1998 Air Jordans with X, Y, and Z specific form, you can see the difference, right? There's a difference in intent. There's a difference in sort of the knowledge and the world of the searcher. And the same thing is true with podcasting. We should stop aiming for the biggest possible audiences and start trying to reach the right people, not the most people. That's the thing I've been hammering on for a long time. And I think it's a conversation we need to learn how to have with our clients and with ourselves. Look, let's be honest. It was easier if we could book somebody to get interviewed by Good Morning America, and yay, and the job was done, and we move on. We put a big win in the column and we move on to the next thing. That world does not exist, at least not nearly as much as it used to. So we have to adapt to the opportunity in front of us. We're going to talk about how to do that. I'm very fond of this quote. I try to use it in as many different presentations as I can because I think it's so helpful. This is Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War many, 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 many millennia ago. And he said, when your strategy is deep and far reaching, then what you gain by your calculations is much, so you can win before you even fight. Like the sound of that. When your strategic thinking is shallow and nearsighted, then what you gain by your calculations is little, so you lose before you do battle. Much strategy prevails over little strategy, so those with no strategy cannot but be defeated. Victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win. With apologies to this Chinese strategist and general, I say victorious podcasters win first and then go to record, while defeated podcasters record first and then seek to win. All right, how does this apply to us? Getting booked and showing up, assuming that the work is going to be done simply by you showing up, is no strategy. It assumes things that are no longer true about the nature of consumption and how audiences work, and it leaves a ton of opportunity just sitting there unexplored, right? I'd rather not get defeated. I don't know about you. I'd rather not use war metaphors, especially given my background, but it's a particularly compelling quote. I'd rather not get defeated. I'd rather win first and then go to record. All right. So, what does that mean? How do we do that? This is the big insight that I had that I want to share with you because hopefully this will help you think about the strategy. There is no one right strategy. Obviously, you're skilled professionals. Many of you have many years in the business. You know that the strategy is important. You're capable of writing a PR plan for your clients, but the nature of that plan may have changed. So I'm going to show you the high level stuff and trust in your wisdom and skill to make the specific adaptations. The three audience model. What are we talking about? Well, the first thing is there is no more the audience. I think we should just stop talking that way. There are audiences, and those audiences are multiple, and many of them are small, and some of them are viewing the same content on TikTok while others are viewing it on YouTube. Some of them are only watching, as Trent shared with ACAST data a couple weeks ago, 19% of weekly podcast listeners are only consuming the podcast on social clips. They don't go and listen to the long form episode. Okay, that's a thing now. It's 20% or what was it? 19? Yeah, a fifth of all um, podcast listeners are not even listening. That's interesting. Rather than get defeated, let's come up with a strategy to deal with that. So, what are the three audiences? Audience one is what we would normally think of for a podcast. They are the listeners or subscribers, the people who follow the show. Okay, that's the classic audience. That's the one that when we go on Podchaser Pro and we're putting in our screening and we're looking for a fit, we're only thinking about that audience. That audience is still important, by the way. But maybe it doesn't need to be as big as we've been assuming it needs to be because it's not the only audience. The second audience is your own audience or your client's own audience, the micro networks of influence, where you can actually make a huge impact in business results and relationships by having more visibility with your own people. They're not seeing the stuff that you post on LinkedIn, if you post anything at all. They're not seeing you regularly showing up in the social feeds. You could use this podcast guest appearance, essentially outsourcing your own content production to the podcast producer and then using those clips on your own networks. We're going to talk about that. So that's a critically important audience. And we have seen time and time again that sometimes it's the one person in your own social or professional circle who sees something, who then reaches out and says, "Oh, I didn't know you did that," or "I didn't know we could do this." I tend to work more in a B2B context, and many of you will also will be working in a B2C context. I continue to believe that even in B2C, there are a handful of relationships, partnerships, collaborations, vendors, suppliers, the whole thing. Like there's a handful of human relationships that make even B2C or D2C, if you're an ecom, make that work. So this can help there. It's not always only about reaching the end consumer, right? Public relations has many publics. Okay. So that's audience one is their audience, the podcast's audience. Audience two is your audience or the client's audience. What's audience three? This is the new thing that everyone is talking about. Audience three is the machines that are ingesting all the information and using it in novel ways. It's not clear yet, so I don't want to overstate the case here. It's not clear yet exactly how uh, audio podcasts play into an LLM and AI assisted search environment. What I do know is that there's a huge body of natural language, which LLMs love. It's what they eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that may even as yet be untapped in the audio format. We do know that YouTube videos are ingested both in training data and in search results. LLMs are not search engines. LLMs will query search engines and then combine, collate, and prioritize the results that they get. So that search world is still important. You probably know this because this is a very common understanding now, although how exactly to work with it is still emerging. All right. So we've got three audiences. We can create content with one guest appearance for all three: content for the podcast followers, content for our own networks of influence, which are multiple, and content optimized for what I love what uh, Will Reynolds from Seer Interactive said, optimize for human trust and machine visibility. Now that's cool. Let's do that. Let's optimize for human trust and machine visibility. We got three audiences. And each of those, by the way, is not singular, but that's my buckets there. All right. Trent, just want to pause here for a second. Any questions, any comments, any thoughts? I know you can't talk, but are you having a reaction to anything I'm saying here?
Yeah, I think I was most excited for you to get into the three audience model because it's something that we've thought about and failed to articulate in an appropriate way. And specifically for clients or for our clients, PR agencies that are trying to get their clients to buy into the idea of being on podcasts in the first place, because there really is this duplicitous way of thinking about it. And I think the way that you've kind of framed up the three audiences is something that if I were a PR agency trying to convince clients to appear on podcasts, I would take this section back and say, I've got a lot more confidence in my convictions about why podcasts are the right fit for you.
Yeah. Now, I've got some good news and some bad news. I think you're exactly right. The good news is AI doesn't have an ego. The good news is LLMs, to the degree that they are exposed to the content you create with podcasts, don't care how many people downloaded it. They care about, is it clear? Is it structured? Is it relevant? Can I connect it with other things? I'm not going to, I have too many things to cover. I'm not going to get into the weeds with, semantic vectors and topic clustering and all the ways that machines, again, linguist, this is like my my time to be alive, because these algorithmic, probabilistic large language models are doing to a large degree what we've always done, humans have always done with language, which is to say we associate words in dimensions of meaning and also in um, uh, dimensions of what I don't want to, I shouldn't even say this, but so Saussure, who created the science of linguistics, talked about the axis of association and the axis of what's the sequential one? Can't remember. Books over there. But anyway, words go in order in a row. That's what makes a meaningful utterance, a sentence, right? Words follow each other in a particular way, but words also have vectors of meaning that associate with other words. Well, this is what the LLMs and AI search, assisted search, answer engines, call it whatever you want. This is what it's doing. Okay, great. So that's good news. Bad news is clients and PR pros, all of us, do have egos. We need a different way to talk about this so we stop associating, and this is going to sound terrible and I really don't mean it to, but stop associating size with importance or significance or something. Take that however you want. But we just got to stop thinking about that as being the most important factor here. Okay, so we've got three audiences. Now, some more bad news, however, is this: none of this happens automatically. And this is where I really need us to have an honest look in the mirror at our own professional commitments and our own personal ethics. And quite frankly, and I'm just going to say it like this, and I'm sorry if this offends anybody, but we need to ask ourselves if the degree to which we have been getting away with professional malpractice is something we're going to continue to tolerate. What do I mean by that? Because that could really annoy somebody. But all I mean is we've known for a long time that just getting a particular placement doesn't actually drive results for the bottom line. But the clients want it, so we've done it, and then they've been happy with it, even though we've had to struggle to find the metrics and the reporting to make it make sense, right? And I would just say you ought to be willing to have this conversation. You ought to be able to tell your client, listen, go to your CFO and ask her what she'd rather take to the bank, downloads or dollars. Can we please get focused around business results rather than personal egos? Many of you, by the way, have been doing this for a long time. I don't mean you, but I do mean in general. There has been a way in which we've just let this go on, even though we've known that these placements don't have the impact that we sort of just let the clients feel like they have. Maybe it's time to cut it out and get focused on making a real difference. Now, that's going to be hard. That's going to require some reconfiguration of how we work. So I hope that I will leave myself time, oh goodness, to talk about that. All right. To make this work, this three audience model, you really have to rethink the way you focus on three things: the before, the during, and the after of a podcast guest appearance. So that's what we're going to talk about now. And I've got a bunch of slides in here because I pulled something out of a 3-hour workshop, which is ridiculous because there's no way I'm going to get through all of them. So I'm not even going to try, but I do want to just flash some things as we go because maybe impressionistically it gives you ideas. I hope that's not terribly irresponsible of me. I'm happy to have follow-up conversations with anybody who wants to, chew on this and kind of push back or discuss how it applies directly to you. So three things you've got to focus on for the three audience model is the before, the during, and the after. And we've got to do that in a particular way. I'm going to start with, what am I going to start with? The after. Okay, this is something that we all probably already know. If you don't put some effort or have your client's marketing team put some effort into promoting the guest appearance, P.T. Barnum was right all those years ago. Without promotion, something terrible happens. Nothing. There is no the audience that you went on the thing and now they've heard it and that's going to drive results. We have to put this in front of the right people. All right, how do we do that? We have to think like a marketer. I know, dirty word. Many of us are principled. We come from journalism. We come from all kinds of other areas, but the marketers have some dark arts up their sleeves that maybe we ought to learn from, or at least hire some of them to be around us. Okay, this stuff, I'm really just going to show this quickly because I want to give you a way to download this. So everything I'm about to show you is actually in a resource that I'm going to show you. You can download it for free. So there's levels of this, and I can't get into the details on all of them, but let's talk about the easy stuff. Level 1, podcast episode comes out. What do? Well, have everybody that you know or the client knows follow the show, write a review of it, of the show, not your own episode. That'd be weird. There's specific places you can do that. You could put the episode link in your email signature. You can post it on X, Twitter. You could pin that if you're still on there. You can do the same on Blue Sky if you're not. You could share it on LinkedIn, add it to the featured section. I'm going to show you something cool about how to do that. Put it in your Instagram, put it in your Linktree, put it the cover art of your Instagram feed. So these are all very basic, very obvious, but these are not, this is like the brushing your teeth part, the hygiene part that like 90% of people aren't doing. They don't do any of this. And this is easy. Put a note about it in the next newsletter that you send out. Okay, simple stuff. And I've got more in the resource. Level 2, now this is getting a little more complicated. It takes a little bit more effort. You could embed the episode player. Every podcast episode has an embeddable player. You could embed that on your own website. You could create an in the news or media page. This is where we really need to have maybe a whole other conversation about how to structure this properly for AI visibility. There is a lot that we can do that we're not doing with the collateral that comes off of a podcast episode. Write a blog post about it. By the way, optimize the bios in all of the blog posts or and websites so that they are AI friendly. What does that mean? They are clear. They say who, what, where, when. They put credibility markers in there. This is not rocket surgery. You can find out how to do this, but your bios everywhere should be credibility signals. They should be clear and direct. Okay. Share the link in various places, write an article that discusses it, add the cover art. That's a little more complicated. All right. This now gets into what most people mean when they say repurposing or content amplification. And quite honestly, nobody does all of this unless they have a dedicated team. Uh, Maybe they're with a network or um, company that does it, but repurposing each episode into dozens of pieces of micro content. Now, we've all heard this for years, and most of us have never even scratched the surface of what could be done here. And you don't have to actually find the Holy Grail. Maybe just do something, maybe one thing could help, because after all, people are consuming this stuff on social feeds. They're not consuming the long form content on social feeds. And if it's an only audio only program, you got to have some visual to go with it because you can't upload an audio clip without a visual. So, again, not rocket science. You maybe know all this, but you got a lot of things you can do: quote images, infographics, audiograms, video snippets, make reels, make shorts, all the things. Okay, so I'm going to go quickly. You know what this looks like. This is all podcast content, but it looks very differently. It plays very differently. It communicates very differently. A lot of it is not done with a strategy or any sort of thoughtfulness. It's just putting it up there. Here's the process we teach, and this is going to set up the other two things that we need to talk about here in the last couple minutes. So you need to mine the gems out of every podcast episode. Uh, and again, this is a bit of our methodology that we do training on, but what does that mean? You need to gather, extract, make, and schedule the micro content that comes out of the thing. Not going to get into the weeds on this, except I want to point out the fact that you need to have a lot of stuff to work with in order to do this, which means, and here's a key takeaway that I want everybody to know: one of the best things you can do or you can have your clients do is record your own content while you're recording the podcast. So every time I'm a guest on a show, I have, now my phone's not in there right now because it's over here recording me the way I'm talking about, but I have a little mini tripod with a phone holder, a little shotgun microphone that plugs in, and this just sits right there. I get my own video of myself talking on the show. Why? Because I can use that a lot quicker than they're going to publish it. I may want to take a piece out of that and use it. So show your work. Record some behind the scenes footage, selfies, videos, whatever. Record your own audio. I'm not wearing it right now, but I often will have. I have a little belt pack recorder. This is not one of the clip-on wireless microphones that you've seen. This is a 32-bit float audio recorder that I can plug a pro lavalier mic in, like this one from Deity. Really great. Hide it under my shirt, just as I would if I'm speaking. Okay, just record your own audio. But the advantage of these things, you can give these to clients, by the way. There are no volume or gain is the proper word here. There are no gain settings on these. They are 32-bit float. It's really just push the button, no levels to set, record, done. You now have audio and video. What could you do with that? Oh, so much. All right, we won't get into the details here. You've got a long form episode, and this is going to get us to the other thing we need to talk about, which is the media training. That episode, you should be able to extract from a long form conversation short clips. This means you have to prepare for the for the guest appearance differently than you have done. Again, much strategy prevails over little strategy, and those with no strategy are destined to fail. So let's not be those people. You actually need to train your clients in a new way. We've started calling this next gen media training. It's really just an upgrade on the traditional principles that so many of us have used for so long. But I'd like you to think about what's different. In the world we came from, the world I operated in as a media spokesperson in conflict zones with very sensitive political topics, the primary goal of media training was to not screw up, right? It was to stay on message and not make a mistake, not get caught out. Now the formats are different. They're longer, they're more conversational. Yes, of course, there's still some soundbite driven media or some TV where, sort of posture and having the right talking points are the key thing. But you need to be able, or your clients need to be able to have long form conversations that work as an interesting and compelling 45 minutes and also have 30, 60, 90-second clips that work as short clips. And ask anybody who's hired to clip long form content, and they'll tell you the biggest problem they have is the clips aren't in there, right? There isn't a short quotable quote or a killer fact, as we used to call them, a statistic. There isn't an anecdote that is structured tightly so it can be delivered with impact in 90 seconds or 2 minutes. There isn't the kind of turn of phrase that would make a great excerpt. So we need to get that stuff into the long form content, and that means we have to train our clients differently. This is one of the biggest opportunities, right? By the way, I'm going to have to stop in a minute here without getting through a lot of some of the details around this. But I just want to say, even for clients you have already done media training with in the past, you can go back to them now and say, hey, things have changed. We're in a multi format, clip driven world. The skills that are required to be successful in this are different than the skills we trained you in 3 years ago or 5 years ago or whenever it was. And we now have a sort of next gen media training. By the way, if you don't know how to do that or you like help with that, we have a train the trainer program I'd be happy to talk to any of you about so we can upskill your team and get you going. But it's going to have to include what you do with the content, which not only includes the assets that you normally think about, it includes optimizing those for AI as well as the pages and the metadata. Uh, Press releases play a role here in a way they didn't used to. So we can talk about that. All right. I'm going to skip this now because obviously you have to schedule those things. Okay. The GEMS process. Like I said, I knew in advance there was going to be too much there. Okay. Here's the thing. If you would like to get at least part of this, I haven't added in the AI related stuff yet. I'm happy to give you something we give our clients, which is 27 ways to leverage your podcast guest appearance. So you can scan that QR code, or, okay, somewhere in here you can also go to, it's at the end, speedofstory.com/pod, POD. Speedofstory.com/pod. Now, I should also just tell you, it's going to ask you for your email address, but I do not add you to a marketing list. We don't even have one of those. I don't write a newsletter. I'm a talker, not a writer. So you put your email in order to get access to the thing. But if you ever do get an email from us in the future, it's a handwritten email from me to you. No automation, no AI bots, nothing like that. So you can grab that. I'll put that back up at the end. I will end with this. The most important skill set now in this hybrid world of long form and clip worthy content is what I call the art of the anecdote. Sound bites are still relevant, but stories, short stories, relevant stories, stories that have some thoughtfulness and have a point. This is a skill set. It's not a new skill set. It's actually a quite old skill set, but it is more relevant than ever. Media training has to teach clients, and we also have to practice ourselves to tell stories that are the right size. That's actually a quote from Roberto Rodriguez, of Austin filmmaker, who said, "Whatever story you tell it at the right size." You could take that to mean, like, is it 9 by 16? Is it a vertical? Maybe that's the right size. You could also take it to mean the scale or the scope of the story. And I'll just leave you with this because I think it helps break open some of the thinking around storytelling. There's a spectrum: epic stories on one side, everyday stories on the other side. Epics are the hero's journey. By the way, a terrible, terrible, and take it from an anthropologist who read Joseph Campbell when he was 16 years old. Great for talking about comparative mythology, terrible for talking about your business or your life. I'm just going to put it out there. You're not living in Star Wars. I wish we were. Sorry. On the other end of the spectrum are anecdotes, examples, illustrations, everyday happenings that people can relate to because they can relate to maybe not the circumstances or the event, but they can relate to the impact or the human experience. This is the crux of our next gen media training. We teach people not only to do the clip worthy stuff, but to make some of those clips very compelling personal stories that really have an impact. The sweet spot for this kind of storytelling is very much skewed toward the everyday. In other words, not the grand arc of your entire life. Although I did, I did start this with I was a kid, and then I went, da, da, da. But it's a little different. I've got an hour. Um, Not that different, actually. All right. So here's ways we help. I'm just putting this out there. I'm happy to talk to anybody forever, especially if we're mutual friends of Podchaser Pro. We help with podcast strategy. We don't do production, but we help you find the right producers. I've been editing audio since I was a kid with a razor blade and quarter-inch tape. I can do it, but I don't. I don't sell it. We do next gen media training, content amplification, strategy, and training. We help with AI optimized assets. Again, a way of thinking about what gets produced by an interview that you can optimize in new ways. And then at a much more strategic level, we do positioning and messaging for PR firms themselves, which is a way of saying that we make shoes for the cobbler's kids, right? Because it's not that y'all don't know this stuff, but you don't do this for yourself. You mostly do it for your clients. All right. Going to end there and see if there's any questions we can have in the last 5 minutes. This goes to the same place as that QR code, speedofstory.com/pod. You can download 27 ways to leverage your podcast guest appearance. If you would like to talk about media training or repurposing or any of the tech, maybe, Trent and I have talked about this. I don't know if we have a firm commitment on it or not, but there's another thing that needs to be said about doing camera ready presentations and how to get set up with it. You can't see this, and I thought I might take a picture from back there, but I have a whole little structure set up here, and it doesn't make any holes in the walls because I'm in a rental. So we do all the kind of nerdy tech stuff. That's, again, a function of me growing up around beardy engineers. But 3 audiences, you can optimize for each of them. You absolutely can get big results from small audience. I'll just end with one story. I love a client who's also become a great friend. Recorded a podcast episode. This is a couple years ago now. 3 years after that episode was published, someone reached out and said, I just listened to your episode on this particular topic. It was actually about speaking at a press conference, skills that you need as an executive to speak at a press conference. I think we should talk. The long tail is very real, and we can intentionally and creatively operate in the world we're in now. It's a little harder. It's a little more fragmented. There's a lot more different disciplines and skill sets involved, but it's the only world that we're in now. And I invite you to get there. All right. Okay. That's the thing. Trent,
Nailed
what
it.
do we got?
Yeah, we have a question from Joy. Do you need to get permission from the podcast to share your own audio and video clips when gathering your own content?
I mean, it can't hurt. And at the same time, I think, well, listen, I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV. I don't even have a TV. Um, I think maybe ask, but also, so here's what's important. What's important is that you don't undercut what they're trying to do. In fact, you should only be a guest on someone's podcast if you are willing to make the benefit to their audience the primary focus of what you're doing. So let's just start there. I don't know that there's a podcast guest booker's code of ethics, but if there is, that should be thing number one. If you can't find a way to make their audience and what they're trying to do with their show something you are going to forward, then you shouldn't do it. Now, that being said, as long as you're not undermining or undercutting what they're doing, if you have a video of yourself, it actually helps what they're doing. Oh, I was going to do an example of this. Joy, I'll give you an example of one that I think is just completely great and doesn't cross any boundaries. Okay. Some of these are in the download, and actually, I think there's probably some that aren't. So here's one. You're going to be a guest on a podcast. Let's say you just recorded the podcast. Maybe you recorded some video of yourself. Maybe you got a picture. Maybe you didn't. You could always say, just recorded this show. I'm so excited of this. Like, this is terrible copywriting. Actually, don't write what I'm saying, but like, this is the spirit behind what you're doing. Have something with a hook, please. And, that goes with the post. Here's another one. go to the podcast on your phone. So, whatever app you use, go to the podcast itself. Your episode's probably not even coming out for a while, but you can go there. You can take a screenshot of the show or of an episode on the show. You can then go to Instagram Reels and make a green screen video with that screenshot as your background and do a face to camera thing where you talk about an episode of the show that you just listened to. And you might even say, I just recorded an episode that's going to come out later, but man, I love this. I love the show. So there's a lot of things you can do that are showcasing you, but giving them more exposure, more awareness. Kind of long and rambling answer, but
Joy said, thank you. Helpful. Adrian, I don't know if you feel this way, but something I think about often is we're supposed to be communicators, supposed to be PR people, we're supposed to be all earned media all the time. However, because we're taking this new concept of media and what is media, that sort of thing, we find ourselves extending past just what traditional earned media and PR was, and we're doing a lot of marketing. Maybe we're even
yep.
doing some advertising. How do you see that playing out over the next 12, 24 months, especially if you're a PR person working in an agency and now, oh, wait a second, I can't just get them the earned appearance. Now I have to promote everything. Like, what does this mean for public relations professionals generally?
All right. Way to end with the easy softball question. Um, First of all, I hesitate, although I did a little bit get on my soapbox, but I hesitate to speak for PR professionals generally because there are so many different folks with so many different uh, areas of focus, and you know this really could run the gamut into a lot of different. So, someone who specializes in public affairs, government relations, should not listen to the same advice as somebody, who um, promotes e-commerce companies that sell their own jam on Shopify. I almost said sell their jam on Spotify, which would be very cool. Actually, that's the advertising part. So here's what I think. I think Ginny Dietrich did a favor to the world when she clarified years ago the peso model, that there is paid, there's earned, there's shared, there's owned. I also think, with apologies to Ginny, who has continued to evolve that model, and it's still very good and very relevant, helps you plan a media mix. I think the boundaries of those are now a lot more blurred. And the fact that what defines them is not necessarily a channel, like this is a paid thing versus an owned thing. I mean, you could be running small budget campaigns to promote your owned media production. So that's paid and owned. And if you're doing it on LinkedIn as a thought leadership post, for example, maybe it gets shared and then you've got more exposure. So the only thing that's still kind of what it used to be is earned, right? And that's a lot smaller than it used to be. And now we have to ask ourselves, maybe it's not even the same. Maybe if you get on a particular type of outlet and you didn't have to pay for it, maybe we could just call that earned because you didn't pay, or maybe you didn't earn. I don't know. I'm getting twisted around here, but here's what I would say. I think the most important thing is for us to evolve to the environment. We've always done this. We just had a fairly long, comfortable period of linear broadcast and mass consumption, you know, and then what was it when we went from three networks to what was the song with the 500 channels and nothing on? Like we did that with cable, and then satellite, and now the internet, and then social, and it's just now it's fragmented and it's not going back. So what do I think this means? I think this means you have to figure out the right. And you already know this. So again, if I sound pretentious, I am so sorry. I don't mean this, but you got to figure out the right mix for each client. Maybe they should take some of their advertising budget and put that into amplifying earned and owned media, for example.
Yeah.
So, peso model still hugely helpful. I just don't think it's, and maybe I haven't paid as much attention to the most recent update, which I'm told is excellent. So I should probably go look at it before making statements about it. I think it's a very good way to think about the mix. I don't know if it answers the question of what should you do in quite the same way because there's so much overlap now.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
it does. Yeah. Thank you. And I put you on the spot. So well
No, it's
reasoned.
good. I mean,
Yeah.
Anything else we got from our friends here? By the way, everyone, thank you so much for uh, coming to this, but more importantly, thank you for supporting Podchaser. This is a cool company with a great product. I wish more of us knew how to how to use it the way I think it needs to be used. I think there's a ton of untapped opportunity. I am not paid to say to say that, um, but there you go. Let me stop this, by the way, so you can see our pretty
Good.
faces as we wrap this up. Um,
Abby said, "Thanks, Adrian. Great information. Guide downloaded." Thank you, Abby. Thank you for
thank
doing
you,
that.
Abby.
Alyssa says thank you. Yeah, Adrian, you and I have gone back and forth through LinkedIn comments and seeing relevant information and passing studies along to each other. And I think one of the reasons why I was excited to have you on as part of this is because I think you understand the meta, if you will, of media. And sometimes as PR agency people or communicators or whatever we want to call ourselves, we get so stuck in flying so closely to the sun that we're not able to see like the big picture of media. So if you found any value in Adrian's talk today, please, he is a wealth of knowledge. He is very liberal in the ideas and uh, tips that he gives, meaning he's going to tell you exactly what he thinks without you having to give him a whole lot of anything. But also pay the guy if he's going to be doing any services for
No,
you.
it's like I say to everybody. By the way, it's just a quick little quip before we end. When the advice is free, you should feel
Yeah,
free to ignore it. It might not be that
yeah.
good.
There you go. And as someone who has been seeing more and more feedback from clients, Podchaser Pro clients in particular, about well, how do we adapt to this new world of the video podcasts and so on? Please do yourself a favor, at least get in contact with Adrian, talk about the next gen media training program. I think it's probably worth the time just to at least take a look at it. Because I do think that if we're doing right by our clients, then we need to get them prepared because this stuff isn't going away, as we've obviously said at length here. So, Adrian, any parting words?
Just one final thought based on what you said. I'm on a mission to get PR pros and especially the owners and principals and partners of PR and comms firms to actually use themselves as um, practitioners of this stuff. I can't go into this because of time, but there is a huge, huge opportunity around what I'm now calling the executive brand advantage. It is easier to rank humans in AI assisted search than it is to rank brands.
Yep.
So use yourself as a test case, do a bunch of this stuff and see what happens for your firm. If you have questions about anything, as Trent said, I'm more than happy to talk to anybody for at least a little while.
Yeah.
Uh,
Cool. Awesome. Well, everyone have a great weekend. The recording will be up early next week, and there'll be a companion blog post that'll go along with it, which will also include some of the links that Adrian shared with us here today. So, cheers, everyone. Adrian, thanks again for your time.
my pleasure. Thanks, y'all.